First of all, thank you very much on behalf of the Laboratory of Phenomenology of the Body and me for giving us this moment of conversation with you.
You're welcome.
We appreciate it so much. You're very welcome to Chile, and in this conversation then I am sure that we'll not cover everything of interest about your huge work, as I would like to.
Better not. Will keep us for hours.
Yes.
Keep us and keep us talking for hours. So we have to choose something.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right. So I would like to focus on three major topics. First, some history that you can share with us about the emergence and development of phenomenology. Secondly, the conflicting relationship between phenomenology and psychoanalysis, what you named the problem of consciousness and unconsciousness. Chile is a very psychoanalytic country, so I think this is a very interesting point that you have here. Third, body memory, and fourth, I've always been fascinated by your exploration of affectivity and interaffectivity, and I would like to discuss your proposal of different levels of empathy.
Okay.
And finally, your question that you posited in a conference in Heidelberg a few years ago about does mental illnesses, why mental illnesses exist. But I would like to formulate it in another form. Does mental illnesses really exist?
Yes.
So, the first topic. In Chile, as well as in other countries, there has been a resurgence of phenomenology, hand in hand with its scientific applications in mental health, cognitive sciences, and neurosciences. But those who know phenomenology as a branch of philosophy applied to science, researchers, of course, know little or nothing about Carl Jaspers, for example. So I know I am asking for an effort of synthesis by dint of reductionism. But could you give us a general overview of the emergence of phenomenology, which I don't know if I am wrong, but I think it arises in parallel to Freudian psychoanalysis, and how it develops until today?
Okay. A huge question, of course, which I can only answer in some spotlights, so to speak, and these spotlights might also be more related to our field, to the field of applied phenomenology, because there are so many modes of phenomenology and approaches to phenomenology that it's completely impossible to give an overview in, let's say, 5 minutes. But of course, you're right, phenomenology is a very special undertaking that came up at the beginning of the 20th century, more or less contemporary development to psychoanalysis, which is interesting because both had to do with with subjective experience, basically, and both reacted, I think, to a certain tendency of 19th century science of the human being, science of the psyche, to increasingly objectify the psyche and subjective experience. So naturalism was at its at its climax at the end of 19th century, and many thought that brain science and natural science will in the end be the decisive approaches to human experience, in particular since Darwinism had shown that human beings are nothing special. They could be, at least that was the claim, could be explained by merely natural processes as part of the evolution. And I think both phenomenology and psychoanalysis reacted against this increasing naturalization of the human being, but in very different ways. Freud thought that the superficial subjective conscious experience, so what everybody constantly experiences as a subject, is only a surface, and we have to look at behind that at the unconscious processes within the psyche. And subjective experience is only a hint, it's only a symbol of what is going on really inside the human being. That was one approach, whereas Husserl took the opposite approach and thought that conscious experience is what is crucial about the human subject and the human being, and we have to investigate conscious and subjective experience in all its depth. So it's also in phenomenology, it's not just what is on the surface, what everybody thinks he experiences, but it's a very delicate and subtle exploration of the experience that is necessary in order to grasp all the richness of the subjective experience. So it's not a surface thing as well. So Freud went down beyond consciousness, so to speak, but Husserl remained within consciousness, but going deeper and deeper in the subtleties of the experience. That is the difference between the two approaches. And from then on, well, phenomenology developed in quite different ways, as you know. One important step was the application of phenomenology to psychiatry, which was essentially the work of Carl Jaspers, designing and developing the first phenomenological psychopathology. But then there were other strands of phenomenology going into the phenomenology of existence, for example, in Heidegger mainly, developing a special existential phenomenology or ontology, which became very influential, in particular in France and Germany in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. And on the other hand, a more body-oriented phenomenology that developed in France, mainly through the work of Merleau-Ponty and Sartre, who took the human being as an essentially embodied human being, where the body is part of or an essential component or dimension of this depth of conscious experience. So the body is the background that always plays a role, that always is contributing to our experience, and that has to be investigated as such in order to show that consciousness is not something like a Cartesian mind, just a pure mind, but it is always kind of extended, enveloped in embodiment, in bodily being. That is a special development in the 1950s, 60s, and has been taken up by many in the decades that came. And then there are, of course, all kinds of phenomenological approaches that differentiated in the last 20 and 30 years, which I cannot enumerate here, of course, but which in particular had an impact on psychopathology at the end, because they took into account the basic experience of the self. So the phenomenology of self-experience became one of the most important approaches and issues in recent phenomenology. So I think that should suffice. I could
Thank you very much.
go on for hours to talk about that.
I see, but maybe being a little ambitious, but if you can talk something about relating the unconscious and consciousness concepts of from Freudian view, natural attitude and phenomenological reduction, and reflective and pre-reflective levels of experience in most modern way of saying. Do you think that there is some connection between them?
Between the concepts of the unconscious. Well, the unconscious is a very special and complicated topic for all philosophy and for all psychology, because obviously it's at the verge and at the margin of what can be experienced and what can be explored, whereas it's always also a problem, because one thinks about the unconscious to be something subpersonal, to be something that is beyond experience. So precisely the fact that the subconscious is in between subconscious and pre-conscious and marginally conscious makes it so difficult to actually decide and to pinpoint the unconscious as belonging to subjectivity, or maybe as belonging to something that is even beyond subjectivity, that is subpersonal. And Freud thought that the unconscious is, in its essence, something beyond subjectivity. So it's not something that the subject can access by his own will, so to speak, so access by deliberately. It is something that works and acts beyond consciousness, from the unconscious depth of the psyche, and these depths are mainly driven by the drives, by the unconscious conflicts, unconscious representations of experience of persons, and all that is somehow beyond what the person can experience and can name and can grasp. So it needs the psychoanalyst, so to speak, in order to go beyond the conscious surface and search for the hidden meanings of what the patient experiences. And these meanings are nothing that is somehow available to the patient, to the person. So in this sense, the unconscious in Freud is something below or beyond conscious experience. In a vertical dimension, that is the subconscious, as it is also often called in everyday language, das Unterbewusste, the subconscious, and there's also the depth psychology that uncovers the unconscious sphere, and all this means that we go somehow down. That was also Freud's metaphor of the psyche, the archaeological metaphor.
Yes.
We go down means, like an archaeologist, we go to strata that are always further in the past, and further in the past means you go down, like in archaeology. And if you go further down, you arrive at the really determining strata of experience. And this is the vertical view of unconscious, of the unconscious. And to phenomenology and phenomenologists, that was always problematic, because obviously you need something beyond the subject and beyond subjectivity in order to explain what we experience, which makes our experience basically kind of a, well, only an epiphenomenon, a surface phenomenon that doesn't really tell us what the person means or wants or intends, because that's all beyond her grasp or his grasp. The phenomenological approach to the unconscious has always remained true to the idea that phenomenology is about subjective experience, but it is also going to the margins of experience. So it's not always what is just in the focus of what you and your conscious awareness, but it can be something that you live. The unconscious can be something that you live in your embodied behavior, in your embodied tendencies, without noticing it because it's not in the focus. But you carry it, so to speak, with your body, with your tendencies, with your inclinations. You carry it into the situation. And there it becomes a part of the interaction of the person with her environment or with others, and unconsciously, but very visibly structures the field of experience and of interaction that the person enters into when dealing with another person, dealing with a situation, and so on. So, for example, a typical unconscious, not very important, but a typical unconscious tendency is that when we have experienced a pain, so an injury, for example, with some of our limbs, and this injury is still kind of lurking in the background when we go into a situation, then we unconsciously leave the limb somehow behind. So we take a kind of protective attitude, and this protective attitude well, prevents us from entering into the painful situation again. So the possible pain is somehow avoided, because we instinctively, intuitively behave that we in a way that we avoid this, that the body is somehow behaving cautiously. That is, of course, not the psychodynamic unconscious in Freud's sense, but it is still something that can illustrate how our field of experience is also structured by unconscious tendencies and avoidance strategies and inclinations also that are present in the field, that are effective in our field of awareness, but that we do not take into account because they are not in the focus, they are not in our reflective awareness. We do not deliberately look at them. We have something other in mind, but nevertheless the embodied field of experience makes us do things that we didn't think we would do. See what I
foreground.
Pardon? That?
In the foreground.
Yeah, they work from the background and the foreground.
From the background, yes.
They work from the background,
yes.
But then something comes up, like a Freudian slip, for example. So I want to say something, and I say it differently because some unconscious tendency is working in my expressive behavior, is effective in my expressive behavior, and somehow modulates it in a way that I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah.
So, in this sense, that's a very complicated explanation now, but I hope I have conveyed a little bit of the idea that the unconscious can be something that we have not deep within us, deep down within us, but that we enact, that we kind of take with us in every situation, and it's in a horizontal way that it is effective. So horizontal means in the in the experiential field, in the interaction with the situation, in the interaction with the other. That is a kind of changing view, turning the view, and not somehow deep inside the patient, but looking at how he behaves, how he relates to others, what he tries to cover because he is not aware of it, but somehow avoids it. Traumatic experience is often an unconscious avoidance of certain situations because the body knows the body.
Example of the injury.
Yes, the injury. Yeah,
but
exactly.
In an emotional.
Yeah, now in a more emotional, more traumatic sense, in the sense of a psychological trauma, but it works quite similarly to the bodily injury. We are injured. We have suffered severe traumatic violence or humiliation, and now a certain situation unconsciously reminds us of that, and we kind of try to avoid it by any means, and go around it, so to speak, circumvent it, so to speak. And that is horizontal. Understand what
yes, it's very useful. Your horizontal way of viewing the conscious and unconscious, I think so.
Yeah.
Yes, and I was thinking that's why polytraumatized people become very rigid in their way of living and relating with the environment, because they are always trying to avoid something.
Exactly. So rigid in both ways, or in two ways. On the one hand, rigid because they cannot move around as freely as before, so they have to restrict their space of living, a space of potentialities. They have a very narrow space of living, so to speak, because they avoid all kinds of situations. And rigid also in the sense that the body also becomes itself a bit more rigid, because it constantly has to, the body constantly has to kind of stiffen itself against a possible stabbing. Kind of preemptive rigidity, a preemptive stiffening of the body against a possible threat. So what you also see often in anacastic compulsive patients, that they have a very rigid comportment, a very rigid bodily attitude, but you find it also often in traumatized patients, because they are always in the always vigilant, so to speak, always not knowing where the next attack will come from, and so the body takes up a kind of protective and rigid, stiffening attitude.
Yes, and I'm thinking that probably in those cases the resonance of the body is completely enclosed in some way.
It's at least reduced to a large extent. So if you take up the term resonance, then it means that the body has a natural tendency and inclination to get in a kind of feedback circle with the natural and social environment. So the body is a very fluid and flexible entity. I don't mean just now the object body, so the material body, but the lived body is a very fluid phenomenon, and it usually has an inclination to resonate with not only with music, for example, but also to resonate with atmospheres, with other people and their bodies, and how they we talk about vibrations, for example. Vibrations are nothing else but a kind of interbodily resonance, and all that happens quite naturally, quite spontaneously, a kind of kind of connection that the body establishes to objects, situations, and other people that can affect the body, that can make it somehow vibrate, resonate with the situation. So that is my notion of bodily resonance, which is of course the basis of empathy as well, the basis of bodily feeling with others. And traumatic experiences, but also other psychopathologies, usually restrict this bodily resonance or make it even disappear. In most severe depression, the patient is completely kind of solidified, completely enclosed within his heavy body and has no capacity to express feelings with any longer, to smile with others, to nod the head as you do right now. Okay, so you just sit there and there's nothing going on, and you feel the complete rigidity of the body and the lack of bodily resonance. That is an extreme example of how the body can change in psychopathological conditions. And in trauma, you also have a lack of resonance, and this protective posture, this protective attitude that patients adopt as a cause and as a result of the trauma also leads to a lack of open interaffectivity, fluid, flexible interaffectivity.
Yes, and probably it participates of a kind of vicious circle in their lives because they cannot access to nurture relationships with others and so on.
Exactly, yes, absolutely.
I would like to come in because we are moving from all my topics, but it's very fine.
Anticipating some of what you said and what you wanted to ask, yes.
We are just now in body memory, trauma, and psychotherapy, which was one of my topics. And I would like to ask you about, let's see, I think that what is occurring now in Israel and Hamas could be seen by your horizontal view of the unconscious. So if I think in that applying the concept of unconscious compulsion to repetition, that psychoanalytic idea, I can think that they are repeating embodied registers from probably the Second War
even further,
yes. So how
further down in history.
Yes. How would you explain for your model of body memory what at least to me seems to be a foreign of repetition conclusion in what is happening today between Israel and Hamas? Or any?
Well, it's not an easy question because repetition compulsion occurs in many ways and in many different situations, and in this case it's a particular way of collective repetition compulsion. So we have to distinguish, I think, between a kind of individual and a collective body memory here. Individually speaking, I would say that the concept of body memory as a kind of phenomenological reformulation of the concept of the unconscious. The concept of body memory is a concept of the living body, the lived body, let's say, being inclined to certain habitual repetitions. Habit is a habitual repetition, of course, so it happens all by itself. We don't need to think about it. Habit is what connects us with situations and carries us through situations without thinking about it, and that is already, in that sense, a kind of unconscious repetition, not a compulsion, of course. We can usually suppress habits, but it's not that easy. If a habit is very deeply ingrained in body memory, then it can really be a problem to suppress it, to stop it. Okay, you already see that there is a certain tendency of repetition in body memory that prefigures, so to speak, the repetition compulsion. But now the repetition compulsion in the Freudian sense is, of course, something that is happening somehow against the conscious intentions of the person. So, for example, you want to avoid a certain painful situation, for example, in your relations with others, and you want to avoid being, for example, abused by your partner, because you have experienced abuse in so many ways in your childhood, and you're decided and not determined not to experience that again. For some reason, it might very often happen that you fall in love with a person and with a partner who makes a wonderful impression on you, and in the end you arrive at you repeat the same pattern and come into a relation where you're mistreated and abused again. And the question is, how does that happen? Because you deliberately wanted to avoid that by all means. And the idea of repetition would mean that there is something like an unconscious tendency in your behavior, but also in your perception of others, that kind of fits to the affordances of the other person. Affordance is a term from ecological psychology, which means offerings. That there's something like things, situations, other persons offer certain possibilities, and which we kind of match exactly, which match to what we are inclined to do. So, sitting on a chair is an affordance. The chair affords sitting, and a nice warm and a nice soft chair affords sitting in a special way, and we sit down and it matches. So that is how the body reacts to affordances. But body memory also reacts to affordances of other people. And the affordance of a person or of a partner who has precisely this pattern of, on the one hand, being very inviting, but on the other hand, being also very occupying and being very dominant, and then being abusive in the end. There's a certain pattern where you kind of match to, where you fit in with your expectations, with your tendencies, and you don't realize that it's the same pattern that you wanted to avoid, because it has a kind of a complicated complicated affordance structure, which invites, but at the same time invites precisely into the patterns that you wanted to avoid. And the idea of body memory is that the repetition compulsion happens or is in place because your early experiences with others precisely prepared your body to always again seek this pattern, because that's where you feel it. That's where you feel at home, basically. That's where you know what you're what you know how to react, how to behave. It fits. That this pattern has detrimental results and outcomes is not so important for the immediate bodily memory of, well, I know that, I go into this familiar situation again, because the affordance is so fitting to my former experiences. It seems paradoxical, but like Freud's repetition compulsion also seemed a bit paradoxical, of course, but this is a kind of explanation that I think makes sense.
It's like the implicit relational knowledge.
It's also implicit relational knowledge. Yes, you can use this term as well. That's Daniel Stern's term for a knowledge and knowing how to relate, interact with another person, and it is implicit because you're not consciously aware of where you have experienced it the first time. Or oftentimes it's related to the first year of life where there is no autobiographical memory in place, so you cannot remember it explicitly, but it's implicitly driving your usual interaction with others.
And in the case of war, it is not something that you would like to avoid.
Okay, the case of war and the collective body memory. It's not that easy to describe, but what about how can we explain this these dynamics between two people or two ethnicities that have a shared history of mutual violence and mutual humiliation, mutual even terror? How does this relate to the mental structure of both people and to the socialization, to the upbringing? And here we have to postulate something like a collective body memory. Collective body memory is what a group experiences together, something like, let's say, a family, for example. A family has a collective body memory because they usually interacted with each other in a certain constellation, in a certain habitual structure of the one person being more in the center, the other being, let's say, the father, for example, behind the son and giving him support, another person being more in conflict with the other and always struggling. And that creates over time a kind of spatial dynamic configuration of how these people interact when they come together. And it's a part of family systems therapy to make such patterns visible through all kinds of family constellation, people standing in a certain spatial position and feeling how it is like to interact with others in this or that situation. So there are special, you know about that probably, there are special ways of making this constellation visible and experienceable in the present, because it leads to the fact that when these members of a group or of a family come together, then they will usually react in familiar ways, sometimes quite different from how the individual person would react and behave outside of the family.
Yes.
It's as if you're kind of drawn into the pattern and you cannot but take the role again of the small child or of the envious brother, and all these interactions are kind of prefigured and you stumble into them again. So this is what I would call a collective embodied memory of our interactions within a group. Now you could transfer the same to a kind of conflict between two groups, because then again there is this pattern, there is this sedimented experiences of how the others behave towards us and how we behave towards them, how we had to defend ourselves again and again against the violence that we experienced. This is, of course, somehow taken up in the whole ritual and self-evident behavior of the group, in which also the children, the small children now are socialized and kind of educated, not and sometimes, of course, explicitly. Never get in touch with one of those. They're bad, they're terrible people, so they're just explicitly taught not to, or to hate the other group, the out group. But even more important is a kind of implicit adoption of the behavior, the pattern, the attitude that you have towards this other group without being explicitly taught or told how you should react. So again, I think that is part of the individual body memory, but this body memory is now shaped by the collective traumatic experiences of the group. And this leads to a kind of repetition compulsion. And well, in one case, for example, one could imagine that it is even more explicit. I've recently, just some days ago, I've read in the New York Times of the special case of one of the Hamas terrorists attacking the Israeli kibbutz, and he murdered one of the women, and he filmed that, and immediately after that he got in touch with his parents, and showed them the video on the smartphone of how he murdered the woman, and he said to his parents with that, "Look at me, I'm a hero. I killed 10 Israeli with my own hands." And he was even applauded by his parents, and he particularly addressed his mother, "Look mother, I'm a hero, your son."
Wow.
That is incredible, and it's really horrifying, but it's also a way to understand how, well, this boy and then later young man must have been socialized in the continuous hatred and the continuous encouragement to take revenge, for instance, to take revenge. However, the mother and the father conveyed that to him, but certainly in a way that was so deeply ingrained in all his tendencies that he was completely sure that he would do something great here. That is how repetition works.
Yes, that body memory or traumatic body register could be the seed that future generations will see germinating in new war reactions and so on, as well as in treatment also in families.
In families. You know that it's to take the other side, so to speak. You know what Netanyahu said when he announced the counterattack of Israelis. And he put it into the words that now the Hamas will suffer something that they won't forget for generations.
Yes, that's the phrase.
That's the phrase he precisely used. And he's right. But it's terrible. Right. It's terrible, of course. Again, what the Israelis do now will be transferred and will be in the next generations, and they won't be forgotten. It's true.
And it's built in the next wars.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go further. During the critical moments of pandemic, I asked to a patient what was that she missed from face-to-face sessions the most. And she said that the shared atmosphere.
That
She said the shared
atmosphere. Yeah, I see.
Therefore, if we think on empathy as a phenomenon occurring in the sphere of interbodily resonance within a shared situational context, one can think that it is especially threatened as a core feature of common sense for developing humans, that they were lacked of a direct face-to-face interactions during pandemic. So what do you think about how can you distinguish between empathy and trust? Is the same, are they different concepts? How do you relate?
Empathy and trust?
Yes.
Well, empathy and trust are related but not necessarily coinciding notions, because we always have to remain aware that the notion of empathy is not only a notion for a nice and agreeable situations, but it's also a notion for conflictuous situations. So empathy is also something that you need in order to experience the severe anger or disgust of another person. And one could even go that far that empathy is something that you even need in order to torment a person, to torture a person. So just to point out that empathy is a general capacity to feel with, so to speak, the feelings of another person, and to perceive and also to feel with them to a certain extent. But that doesn't mean that you necessarily are in a trustful and harmonious relationship with the other. So that is just what we have to what we have to take into account before going into the topic more deeper. But now, the phenomenological notion of empathy is, of course, a special one, because it has always been in a position to more cognitive notions of how we empathize with others, how we kind of make sense what others experience, what they express, what they intend to do. And the main notion that is dominant in social science is, of course, something like a theory of mind.
Yes.
So these are notions, or simulation theory.
Yes.
These are notions that take the other as someone who cannot be accessed directly, so to speak. There is no way to enter into the subjectivity of another. Therefore, we have to make certain inferences and certain assumptions about what the other person could mean or could do or could feel, and that is how we make sense of her behavior. So kind of indirect access. There is no direct access. The theory of mind says, the theory of mind theory says, therefore we need something like a theory, something like a way of making sense of the other in ourselves. And this idea of cognitive psychology has always been opposed by phenomenologists, arguing that our primary relation to others is not based on the assumption that there is another object, another body, and now I have to think about what would go on inside this body, so to speak. So the distinction between the object body and the inner mind is like a Cartesian distinction, a dualism that phenomenology always opposed or argued against, always was in a position to, arguing that our primary experience of the other is that of a lived body, which means that the other is present, not inside his body, but with his body as the living body that we experience. So you are, when I look at you, not someone who's maybe beyond, inside or behind your front, and I have to kind of mind read what you possibly think and feel. But first and foremost, you're present to me as an expressive, embodied being. So as a living being, and the whole of your experience, of your appearance, is what you are for me. So you're not inside. And I'm not inside either, but that's a different story, and how I have to conceive of myself as an embodied subject. We are all inclined to think of ourselves as being inside, in an inner space that nobody can see, and that is somewhere in the brain or in the body. And I have a quite different view. I think we both are the ones that sit here and that express ourselves and that speak to ourselves, and then look each other into the eyes. So that is what we are, not something inside. I think that it's important to point out as the basis for the idea that now a primary empathy between people doesn't need a theory of mind. It is the immediate perception of the other as an expressive being, so that we can immediately experience and perceive the joy of the other in his smile, or the sadness of the other in his tears or in his sad face, or the exhaustion of the other when lying, bowing the head, and so on, and the shame of the other when blushing. So that is how we primarily experience the other as an expressive being, and there are of course many, many more subtle resonances going on between us, like the nuances of the gaze, of the frowning, of the smiling, of the position of the head. All that is taken up by our own body and kind of experienced in a resonance that make me immediately aware of how it feels to be you at the moment. This bodily resonance happens between us, and it's a circular interaction leading to a kind of atmosphere that's of course the term that your patient used, leading to a kind of atmosphere that is an intermodal, holistic experience of our bodily interaction with all senses and with all dynamics, rhythms, ups and downs, outward, inward movements, and so on. All that creates a miraculous, holistic experience that is the shared atmosphere. We sometimes talk about the first impression that another person makes on us. And this first impression conveys so much about what it is, what he or she is as a person, that it's also kind of miraculous how much we can, which we can experience in the first in the first seconds, or let's say 10, 20, 30 seconds. Of course, this first impression can be differentiated, and to a certain extent sometimes it has to be corrected as well, but it's always so full of, so rich in experience that it's really miraculous how the body experiences that. And the idea of primary empathy is that this shared atmosphere is what connects us, what creates an embodied presence, what it means to be present to each other. And this presence cannot be replaced by of course not by emails, it cannot be replaced by online contacts with on the screen, because you have of course a lot of information going on and also a lot of perceptual information, but it never creates this surrounding atmosphere that you need in order to have this. Yeah, yes. It's bound to the bodily presence. It cannot be replaced by a kind of indirect communication. It's all fine. We can communicate quite a lot, by these means, by digital means. But it's not that it can never achieve the shared atmosphere, because this is bound to a shared space in which these spatial and bodily experience are proceeding.
And it hasn't to do with the external atmosphere itself. It has to do with the specific atmosphere that emerges from the interpersonal encounter.
It's an atmosphere that we create together.
Yes.
Of course, sometimes it's embedded into an overall atmosphere of a space of a room. It can be a cozy flat, or it can be a cold.
Noisy,
Of course, that plays a role, but nevertheless, besides this external atmosphere, the crucial interpersonal atmosphere is something that we create through our interaction, in the course of the interaction.
Do you think that this atmosphere can be investigated? And if yes, how do you think it could be investigated?
I would say that at least a microphenomenological interview can contribute a lot to the very subtle signs and expressions that altogether create this atmosphere. An atmosphere is a diffuse, qualitative experience, intermodal, as I said, and containing all kinds of not clearly describable elements. It's not something that where you can point, like the expression of a face. It's very difficult to say, oh, this is a kind of hostile expression. How would you know that someone has a hostile expression? But you know. You cannot say, well, it's here, or it's this wrinkling, or it's somehow the gaze. Well, a little bit you can say, well, perhaps the gaze was a bit pointed, was a bit sharp, and it's created by I don't know the term.
This.
Yeah, making something like that. But the expression of the face of the other is a holistic impression. This is how our primary experiences are characterized. They are holistic, they are qualitative, they are kind of complex but diffuse. It's not a constellation of single elements. But then, starting with these experiences, you can of course try and describe kind of the threads that you can draw out of this complex situation, and describe them through microphenomenological techniques like evocation. How was it first time to look at this face? What did you notice? What was prominent? And try to increasingly pinpoint at least some major threads that can be drawn out of this holistic knot of the first experience. That might be one way to explore the atmosphere. Another way is maybe to to create atmospheres deliberately. And atmospheres can be created. We know that from theater in particular,
Yes.
and from living, from our dwellings. So our flats are something where we create a familiar atmosphere. But also in theater, not only the backdrops create a certain atmosphere, but also the way the person enters the stage and uses his voice and his gestures. And a good director of a theater performance will know how to create this atmosphere.
We are phenomenologists with that.
yeah, exactly. So, how you could investigate how a certain professional person or skilled person creates a certain atmosphere by putting together certain elements and certain processes, and so that the visitor or the audience is moved by this atmosphere. I think that's another way of investigating.
And with physiological measures?
Yeah, well, that's very difficult because atmospheric experience is so holistic that it's very hard to say, well, this or that physiological measure or brain process is somehow contributing.
The whole body, maybe the heartbeat.
The heartbeat, okay. The heartbeat, the
skin
skin conductance, of course, yes,
Or
that may be ways to.
Some tools for registering the energy flowing in your body by images also maybe can be. Let me formulate it in a better way. What would you like to say about this? Thinking in your conference in 2018 in Heidelberg, I would like to take this idea a bit further, as I said, and raise the question about whether mental illness is self-excellence, contextualized with what is currently the stream of biological psychiatry that is proposing mental illness as just another physical health problem and not strictly a mental health problem. Thinking on inflammatory factors, endocrine or immune system, microbiota, good brain axis, and of course the relation to the central and peripheral nervous system. Yes. What do you think about?
So the question is, does mental illness exist at all? That was what you were up to. Why does it exist? Is it, of course, a very different, difficult question, but does it exist at all? So the question is then, of course, what do we understand by mental illness? And the biological model is certainly insufficient because mental disorders, different from bodily disorders, are not exhausted by looking at certain and finding certain substrates that we have, for example, in pneumonia. Let's take this as an example of a bodily disease. There's pneumonia. There are certain changes in the alveoli of the lungs. There are certain viruses or bacteria that create that cause the inflammation and so on. But in mental disorders that doesn't work because the subjective experience of the disorder and the intersubjective experience of the disorder is an inherent part of what it means to be mentally disturbed, disordered, or ill. So it's not something that we can take apart and say, well, there's the illness of the disease, and then, well, the other component is just an epiphenomenon. It's just how the patient experiences it. That doesn't make sense because the experience is the disorder.
It's the problem.
It is the problem, precisely. And there are, of course, correlates to the experience, but you could never say, well, I can skip the experience and just take the correlates. That doesn't work. Without the experience, we don't find any correlates because the brain doesn't tell us what is well, normal or not normal. We can only ever start from the experience and from the disordered experience, and then find maybe certain neurological correlates. So, in that sense, mental illness is quite different from bodily diseases. And that is also the reason why all the search for genetic or biomarkers of certain disorders has had no effect and no success whatsoever. So they have searched for biomarkers of certain genetic markers of mental disorders since 20, 30 years now, and the result is nothing. They haven't found any. So the mental disorders can only be diagnosed from the experience. And the reason is that subjectivity, as such, plays the crucial role for experiencing the disorder and also for the course of the disorder. For example, being depressed is not just being depressed, but it means that I have certain thoughts about my depression, certain thoughts about the future, thoughts about myself, and these thoughts in a circular feedback, in a vicious circle, feed into my mood and all the time worsen my condition. And with this worsened condition, I interact with others. And in this interaction, I cannot interact as usual, so I receive a certain negative reaction or reply, or I cannot realize my wishes in a certain situation, and then I'm kind of turned down and so on. So the interaction with others again contributes through vicious circles to my depression. So where is the depression? The depression is not here in the brain. The depression is not within the body. And depression is, of course, not with the others. The depression is the ongoing process of my subjective embodied experience unfolding itself within me, with others, and now creating all these vicious circles that I've shortly pointed out. And the therapy and the treatment of the disorder has to take into account all these processes, lived, embodied processes within the patient, and horizontally speaking, so again, the embodied processes between the patient and others, in order to find new ways of reversing these vicious circles, starting new positive circles that can lead to an increasing amelioration and relief of certain negative cycles. So what we do in psychotherapy and also in all kinds of body-oriented or art therapy, music therapy, all therapies that work with the ongoing embodied process in which the illness basically consists. So the brain, of course, is taking part in all these processes, and it's always, yes, it's also formed and changed through these processes, and to a certain extent it can also be addressed through psychopharmacology, for example, and in a modified way, contributing to a better way of maybe receiving psychotherapy in the end. So the question is not what is where is the illness, because it is nowhere and everywhere. In that sense, it doesn't exist as an object, as an entity, but it is the ongoing process which extends over the body and the relations to others. And the question is not where can we grasp the illness, but where are our interventions reasonably investigated? Where do we start with the interventions? Which process do we want to modify, or promote, or impede, or whatever?
Yes.
So that is a more process-oriented, a more dynamic view of how mental illness unfolds and how it is treated.
Oh, thank you very much, Thomas.
You're welcome.
Before ending, I would like to express my grateful for all your support when I was there in Heidelberg.
Oh yeah.
I always remember the colloquiums all Tuesday. I don't know if they are
still running. And during terms, of course, every
and
Tuesday.
I only would like to ask you about the future of psychiatry, psychology, and the training processes as in your role of a teacher, a very renowned teacher, and you have seen a lot of generations of psychiatrists, psychologists passing over your
my professional career. How it
How
will
do you
develop?
envision that?
That's a very difficult question, because there is no denying that current mainstream psychiatry is still on a rather biological route, and looking at just the university, the academic departments, at least in Germany, it doesn't seem that it will change in the next 5 or 10 years. The biological paradigm is clearly established, and it's still determining the research and the research careers of academic psychiatrists to a large extent. My hope is for the increasing interest in phenomenology in psychiatry internationally or worldwide, and the hope is in the increasing discontent that the biological paradigm has created in the larger psychiatric community. So people who are really working in the hospitals and in the private practices and working in the social environments of patients, so the communities, they are more and more open for social, phenomenological, ecological approaches to mental disorders, and this is certainly spreading at the moment. So there's a clear tendency towards more ecological, in my understanding. So ecological approaches, that means looking at the interrelations of patients with their environment and looking at the social influences that contribute to mental disorders that are usually not part of what psychiatry cares about. But that is a clear sign of hope. There's more awareness for this dimension of mental disorders, and we have to fight for it too.
Yes, of course.
Increasingly,
you are doing a lot for this, and I would like to do my part here in Chile also, because I would like to have the same hope here. I think that it is beginning to be the same feeling with the biological psychiatry to put things in a better balance here in Chile.
Yeah.
But still there is a huge trend towards biological
Psychiatry. Yeah.
Yes. So I feel
Same
as
experience.
an activist
Yeah.
of phenomenology here.
Yeah. Okay.
So thank you very much,
You're welcome.
Thomas.
All the best.
It was
for your
very nice to talk with you.
Thank you.
We could be talking and talking and talking.
Yeah.
about